we're on a bit of a roll, guys. So we're going to keep powering through. Actually, this will be the last on the Intrinsic Extrinsic series that started in episode 086. This one's staying intrinsic with tremendous discipline, because we've talked about benefits of intrinsic rewards and drives and motivations. We've talked about the pitfalls of the extrinsic and the external stuff that comes from the outside. So now we're going to talk about the importance of staying on course. It's actually not that easy. Now, tremendous quote to open with from David Dieter, who wrote a great book called The Way of the Superior Man. It's quite well known. I highly recommend. And he talks about the difference between suppression and self-discipline. So I'm going to read it to you. Just remember that self-discipline is not self-suppression. Suppression is when you resist and fight against your desires, keeping them as buried and unexpected as possible. Self-discipline is when your highest desires rule your lesser desires, not through resistance, but through loving action grounded in understanding and compassion. Wow. David. Take a bow, son. Well said. Well said. What an incredible way to think of discipline. It's so often thought of, I guess it comes from our school context and the bashing of procrastination, and it's this idea that you need to suppress what you really want to do something everyone thinks you should do, that you think you should do, that you want to do, which is study. But really, it's such a boring freaking thing to study things you're not interested in. So we get into this habit of thinking that we should force ourselves to do things we really don't want to do. And I'd probably, take issue with that. But stuff that's intrinsic would obviously, as being defined intrinsic, be something that comes from us, which means it's something that would be what he talked about in that quote, one of our higher desires, right? If it's not, then it's not intrinsic, and then it's not what we're talking about in this episode. Our highest desires rule our lower desires through, many things he talked about, and understanding and not resistance. How powerful is that? So what are we talking about here? This is, for example, my intrinsic kind of drives would be to spend time writing, being creative, working on projects that help add better options and revolutionize the way we think about education and nonlinear journeys, right? This is part of Joe's arc. This is what resonates with me right now. Podcast is part of that picture too. Now, say I get an offer to, this is probably not going to happen, this is very hypothetical, to go run KPMG or some big company, right? And be a senior director there. Or be the CEO of a company doing something else, right? Now, what we've got there is, the intrinsic journey, long, slow to pay, financial struggle, risks, long journey, right? Very intrinsic. Not really attention or external validation. Maybe later, but certainly not at the start. On the other hand, you've got the opposite. You've got really prestigious role, great status, probably comes with a great salary package, not really much risk, lots of credibility, probably opens lots of doors as well. Pretty cool opportunity. And so someone like me might think, but even if I care about all this impact stuff and mission-based stuff, could I then just bring it into the work anyway and have the best of both worlds? And this is where that's very tempting. Even if that were to happen, it'd be you have to stop for a moment and think, that's freaking tempting. But it would be going away from the intrinsic. This is what I talked about when I talked about minimum viable lifestyle. It's like, well, no matter what opportunity was put in front of me now that required me to, for example, not write or do the podcast, no matter what it paid, it really wouldn't be that great an opportunity because I've only got one life to live. And the best way I guess I've learned I can spend my time through trial and error is writing, right? Probably even more than the podcast, to be honest. And so it's really not that great opportunity, but it does have some benefits and perks, and it is still attractive and it is still tempting. And this is what I love, the quote by Data. I don't even know how to say his name, but the hierarchy of those desires. So you have to decide for yourself. Are you, maybe there's nothing wrong with it, but is it important for you to kind of build a legacy and image and have a track record, maybe something like that, right? Or what is your higher desire? Is your higher desire, something that comes intrinsically to you? Maybe for you, the dilemma would be more time to work on your hobby, read, or spend time with family than working longer hours for a more prestigious role. Really interesting to think about how discipline becomes part of this, because most people don't have a shortage of options. But I know a lot of people who are spending a lot of time doing things that don't align with them. And it's clear to me, maybe not to them, what does align with them. Maybe they know that they could spend more time on it, but it's having to drop something that brings status and security and probably comfort in the eye and appeases up the desires and opinions of others. That's the hard bit. There's no material, physical, actual barrier in their way. But it's a lack of discipline. It's a lack of discipline. Now, it's not for me to presume what the hierarchy of your desires or drives is. It's for me to decide mine. You might reject this whole idea. Great. But come up with a better one in place. Because this is something that's really beneficial to be clear on. So keeping that discipline to the things that are intrinsic and not getting sidetracked. I've got rules, like for now. Again, this is not presuming that a lot of these opportunities come to me, but I was talking about this yesterday. I've really hated the experience of working in a fixed office location full time. It feels unnatural and I don't do my best work. It feels counterintuitive to me living a good life and even doing the best work I can do. So one of my rules is to not really opt into things that probably require that sort of office-based work for me. Remote's fine. Let me go to my cafe. I can still be part of a team. That's fine. I'm not ruling out working for a company in the future. Not ruling that out. But probably ruling out being pegged to an office, singular office. Just doesn't align with me. I'm clear on that. And so it's the discipline, no matter how good the pay or the status or even the doors that open up. If it's going to take me away from doing my best work, I need to be disciplined and keep discipline about that decision. So that's just like a very simple, trivial example, but one that's important to me. So how do we do the discipline? And it's not this magic thing, but I think being clear is normally the number one thing for me. Again, this is very bucket stuff. Bucket's a lot about priorities. Bucket episode number 61 is the first episode on the bucket. So writing it down for me helps. Writing down what's important. You're more committed to things. There's a lot of research on this, but again, you'll find it for yourself by testing it. You write something down like Joe doesn't like being in an office environment. Joe doesn't like being a full-on CEO and doesn't like being a complicated manager of a complicated big team with logistics-based companies and moving parts, blah, 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 whatever it is. Writing it down is a really good first step. Even if you don't show it to anyone, you've just got this objective record. It sends information back to your brain. I always think of it this way. Even if it's happening in your mind, your eyes can't see it because your eyes face outward. But putting it somewhere where your eyes can see it, wow, huge. Clarity, when you write it down, so step 2, write down why. That works really well for me. So don't just write down the thing. Remind yourself why. Again, I don't do my best work. So if I was going to go somewhere into an office environment, because it's like, well, this might help your work for this company instead of going it on your own, running your own project, sure. But if I remind myself, I guess I don't even do my best work in this sort of environment that the opportunity requires. So the why behind things is so good. But more to our point on intrinsic, why? Why would I spend more time writing and podcasting? Well, that's where I think I can make a great contribution, but also what resonates with me the most. Probably for the reason that it is my biggest contribution I think I can make. So being clear on that, writing it down, not just leaving it as a mental ping-ponged idea bouncing around aimlessly in the brain. Third thing I use is the so that. I love asking so that, because so that always takes you to the first reason for the thing you're doing. So, I'm creating the podcast so that I can bring awareness to any projects and pieces of work I'm engaged in, and also to open doors for others. So that those people can live lives more true to themselves, can write their own thoughts and not be so influenced by external things, and so that they can in turn open doors for others and perpetuate the cycle. So that, and it's kind of like doing the 5 whys exercise. But so that principle, it's something I just invented for myself, just connects me to the reason I first started doing that thing. And sometimes you remember why. You're like, oh, I've gone away from that. Really powerful. You might do that today for whatever job you have or whatever you're engaged in at the moment. And I've started lately, actually, just note this down. I write down in my daily journal, I've started writing down the reason I'm doing things, like the reason I'm doing the podcast and blog, and the reason we're working on the constant student community at the moment, the online community. And I write down the reasons I'm doing that. Trying to remind myself every morning. This is a new experiment, but I'm liking that so far. Now, this is just me. Don't pretend to be the grand wisdom master expert at any of this. I'm just reflecting it. But even if you don't like those things, hopefully they spur an idea for what you would like to try, because I think it is important. And I feel like that is the final piece of this jigsaw puzzle. For now, we're talking about the intrinsic versus the extrinsic. And it's super important with the objective of this podcast in terms of, helping you articulate and write your own journey, not just being influenced by the accidental influences others give you. Being authentic, because that's how I think people will do their best work and open the most doors for others and the best doors for other people. So very important understanding dynamic. We'll do a recap episode next. So yeah, even if you haven't listened to all the episodes, you can listen to that. We'll give a bit of a guide. But thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us again. Remember, in the meantime, the best way to open 1,000 doors for you is to concentrate on opening doors for others. This has been the With Joe Wehbe podcast, and we'll see you again tomorrow.